And when we come back, Reagan biographer Craig Shirley, author of the new book, Last Act, after this word from our sponsors. Wait till you see what we do for Arbor Day. If you follow Republican politics, you might get the sense that the candidates for president really like Ronald Reagan. Recently, we were visited by someone who is one of the most prolific Reaganites on this planet, Craig Shirley. His new book is called Last Act. It's one of many books about the 40th president. So what sets Craig's book apart? We asked him. So, Craig, you've written 2 books about Reagan before. There are lots of books about President Reagan.
Yes.
What is different about this one?
Well, nobody's ever written about the end of his life, and that's what it's about. It was, I was working on a previous Reagan book about 4 or 5 years ago, and my then 11-year-old son, Mitchell, was highlighting all these binders. You know, I had, not binders of women, but binders of news clips and material from the Reagan Library, and he was supposed to go through it. Every time Reagan's name came up, he was supposed to highlight it. And my books have always been family affairs. Zareen, my wife, does all of my editing and creative input, and my boys have done research, and my daughter's done, you know, fact checking and things like that. So anyway, he said about 9 o'clock one night, he says to nobody in particular, he says, "Dad, has anybody ever done a book about Reagan after he was president?" And I thought for a moment, and I said, no. And I started looking into it and realized that, you know, he lived for 16 years after he left the White House. There was a lot of living that went on in those 16 years.
Well, talk about that a little bit. I mean, there are presidents now for whom the post-presidency matters a huge amount. Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton have had big post-presidencies. What are the highlights and the most important parts of Reagan's post-presidency? You
know, Reagan never used the word retirement, but I also think he was tired. He was the oldest president. He left office, and he was tired. There's no doubt about it. And he needed to get back to California, get back to the ranch. He needed to, you know, recharge his batteries. But he was always active too. But he didn't worry about his legacy the way Carter did and others did, but because he left so popular and so successful. So, you know, he never, you know, Lou Cannon once told me, he interviewed Reagan many times, but Reagan never used the word legacy and would resist talking about it. His attitude was that the American people think I did a good job, then that'll be good enough for me. And so he was not obsessed. I mean, he did a presidential library. He did 2 books afterward. There was a lot of, he was knighted by the Queen. There were speeches in London. There were speeches in Moscow. He met with Gorbachev 3 more times after leaving the White House. So he was always active. He went whitewater rafting. He went for a blimp ride, you know. But he also just put, I think in a way he compartmentalized his time in Washington and put that aside. And then, as a matter of fact, his diary entry, his last diary entry says, then home to California, the start of a new life. He was done being president, and now he's going to move on to something else.
You listed a lot of things that were eventful. Obviously, one of the things that gets most discussed in this period of his life was the illness that he had. And there's been some debate about the trajectory of that and the timing of that. Talk about the debate and what you see as the truth.
I think the truth, or the facts as they exist, Mark, is that AIDS came and went and saw him for 8 years. There's his schedule, there's his diary, there's his letter writing, there's his activity. Is that to a person, everybody from James A. Baker to Ed Meese to Marlon Fitzwater to A.B. Culverhouse, all the key people who were there either all 8 years or part of the 8 years or to the end of the 8 years, say that Reagan was just as active and vital on January of 1989 as he was in January of 1981. There was no sign whatsoever of the Alzheimer's. In fact, you know, he went to the Mayo Clinic every year to be diagnosed, for an annual medical checkup, you know, physiological and psychological, and he passed every year with flying colors.
So what's the earliest you think that it started to show?
Well, the first Mayo says the first detection of early onset Alzheimer's was in the spring of 1984, or 94, which would have been 6 years after leaving the White House.
How do you think the way that they handled the illness, right, became also an important kind of a milestone in a way, right? Because a lot of presidents in the past, when they had gotten ill, even after they'd left office, concealed their illnesses. Nobody knew they were sick until they actually were dead. Just talk about the way in which the decision was made to bring his illness into the public.
He made the decision himself. You know, in fact, he wrote about it in his letter about Nancy's breast cancer and her other surgeries and his own bouts with colon cancer and things like that. And they decided to, almost to the day that he was told by the doctors, he sat down and wrote the letter to the American people. But I think now the modern standard is
disclosure.
all disclosure, absolutely. I don't think you can keep things from the American people.
Our thanks to author Craig Shirley. His book, The Last Act, out now. We'll be right back with some news about us, the Iowa State Fairgrounds, and Mr. Donald Trump after this word from our sponsors.